the first image that you have up here is the spray pattern coming out of a modern airbrush. Amelia, do you have the Venturi Force picture? Is that next, where the mouth's blowing on the straw?
Yes. Would you like to
Can
show
we
that one?
start with it? Yeah, I want to start with that one.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. So before we get into a modern airbrush, it's helpful for people to understand some of the science that's involved with how an airbrush works. This is the basic. This is the first airbrush that you're looking at, and it's nothing more than two straws. And you have a tube that's blowing across. You can see the mouth blowing on that first tube, and then you can see a straw that's in our colored liquid. And what we're taking advantage of is we're creating a low pressure. We're creating a low pressure by blowing over that straw through the air tube. The harder we blow through that tube, the more low pressure we create, the further that we blow the color. So that low pressure is what's sucking up the green fluid in the straw. And then as soon as it hits the air that we're blowing through that tube, that's when it breaks apart and sprays. So very, very basic. And this is an actual device that you'll see for sale, even in cake decorating for blowing lusters. But obviously, we're not going to use this for cake decorating because we've got our own breath and everything that's in it blowing across there. But this is a 150-year-old piece of equipment that's still around today, and it's the driving force and science into what makes a modern airbrush work. So, yeah. So now we can back up to the first slide that you showed, which was the spray coming out of a modern airbrush.
Okay. There you go.
And what is important in this picture is, and it doesn't matter make, model, or style of airbrush, that silver gizmo there, it doesn't matter. Insert your equipment. What's important to see is the shape of the airbrush spray itself that's coming out of this piece of equipment. And it should look a lot like a flashlight beam. The closer to the front of the airbrush, the tighter everything's together. That's why we have a nice tight circle. If you just chop that air spray and turn it and look straight at it, you'll see it's very, very tight perimeter. The closer you are to the airbrush nozzle. The further away you get, the more that color spreads out and disperses, and the softer it gets. That's what you see in that second circle, that second bisect, is it's getting much softer and fuzzier and larger. And if you get far enough away from that cone-shaped spray, it'll actually drift off into nothing. So when we're airbrushing, we're taking advantage of everything that's in that cone. So if I want tight lines, if I want tight controlled spray, I'm going to be working much closer to the surface. If I'm doing accent work, I'm going to be working somewhere in the middle of the cone and just catching a little bit of spray on my little flower that I'm airbrushing. If I'm painting a cake gold, I'm going to be much closer to the end of that airbrush spray because I want a nice big spray area that doesn't have hard lines. And what I do is I build up spray, I overlap it line by line by line, so I get a nice integrated layering effect. That's how I get a nice solid color on a cake rather than something that goes stripy. So this is the heart of what we're trying to get the airbrush to do today. The larger our equipment, the more power we have, the more air we have, the more of this flashlight beam air cone color that we have available to us to work with. The smaller and more delicate our equipment, the smaller that spray pattern is going to be. So that's what we're trying to get, and we want that spray to be nice and smooth and consistent. And now we can go into a bit of the innards and what's making that spray on the inside of the airbrush.
Great.
Yep. And we'll come back to the splatter.
That's that one? Okay.
Yeah, what we're looking for now is the exploded drawing, yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
Here we go.
Okay. What we have is, you see the big black arrow? That's the airflow. That's where our hose is connected. Mm-hmm. And that's going to blow air up through a tube on the inside of the airbrush, and it's being forced out the front. So it's a little bit upside down of what we were looking at with the mouth on the tube. So just take that picture and turn it upside down. So we've got air coming from the bottom, and then we've got color coming from the top, and that's what's underneath that reservoir lid. So we have two tubes that are coming together. The color is going to be coming through the very center of that tube, and it's going to be coming through the fluid nozzle. The air is being forced around that fluid nozzle in a ring, and the very, very end of the airbrush where the fluid nozzle and the fluid needle meet is inside that nozzle cap. That's where everything combines, and that's where our little cone of color is coming out. It's coming out from that nozzle cap. Can we look at where the fluid needle and fluid nozzle illustrations, where the needle goes into the nozzle?
Yep.
Okay. So I've gotten rid of all the other parts so that you can see the heart of the matter. And this is where our color is coming through. It's coming through the fluid needle, which is inside the color tube, and then it's being forced through the fluid nozzle. Now you can see how that needle comes all the way forward, and I made a cutaway so that you can see that it's actually mating on the inside. And the angle of the fluid needle is meeting up against the inside wall of the fluid nozzle. So when that needle seats all the way forward, the tube where the paint is coming through is closed off. So that needle is actually acting as a stopper. When we pull our trigger back and we mechanically pull that needle back is when we open up, but that's what opens up the floodgates. That's what opens up and allows color to come through. So you're pulling back on the paint stopper, basically, in a very controlled manner. The more you pull back, the more open that hole is, and the more color that can come through the fluid nozzle. So we've gone through how we're deliberately creating a low pressure to draw the paint through a tube, and how that tube is the fluid nozzle, and how the fluid needle is acting as a stopper. The more you understand about how an airbrush is designed to work, the more realistic expectations we have of the equipment, and the easier it is to learn the equipment, what it can do for us, and how to use it and what we want it to do.
Airbrushes tend to, have problems.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and
yeah.
if you don't know how it works, how are you going to fix the problem? And the last thing we want is to get into a situation where we are, we have a deadline, we've got hours to have this cake ready, you need to pull out your airbrush and do this little detail work, and it's not working. What do we do?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of engineering, there's a lot of precision tolerances happening, and it's all everything that you're looking at here is stainless steel. The airbrush body itself is chrome. So it's made out of very rugged equipment. But these two parts that are required to make this airbrush function have high precision tolerances, and they are delicate, even though they're stainless steel. And most of the trouble that people have with airbrushing comes from cleaning, improper cleaning, and damage to these two delicate parts that are on the screen right now. So when we start having problems with an airbrush, and that's why we're going to go through some of the basic troubleshooting to show exactly what's going on in this heart of the airbrush. So we can take a look at the next slide. This is the most common. This is a partially blocked fluid nozzle. So you can see that the fluid needle isn't making a good stopper. It can't come all the way forward because something is dried, or we've got too big a pearl. We tried to put a disco sparkle through our airbrush. Something is jamming the front of that. And so the needle can't come all the way forward and basically close our bottle. It can't be a stopper, which means the second that our airbrush is on, it's going to be spraying a little bit of color. And obviously it's a bad thing. You're going to lose some control. Now, if that blockage is big enough, the needle's not even going to come through the tip. It's going to be pull back even further, and you're not going to be able to get any color through. This can be from, again, using the wrong product, using too thick a product for the airbrush or the air pressure that we have available to us, using a product that's has too big a chunk, and just, again, improper cleaning. All right. Now there is that gray object. That's our fluid nozzle.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got the needle coming through just like we saw before. And that outer piece is our nozzle cap. That's what's protecting a lot of these delicate parts. Now, if you'll notice, remember me talking about that ring of air that that surrounds our paint path? You can see that ring of air is made by the nozzle cap. You'll see a gap right between the fluid nozzle and the nozzle gap. If that ring of air is interrupted, I don't know, Amelia, if you can take your cursor and just kind of circle around so they can see what we're talking about.
It's right here.
And see that inside circle? There you go. It's like a bullseye. Mm-hmm. So the center of the bullseye is the fluid needle that's poking through. The next ring of the bullseye is the opening of the fluid nozzle. That's that heavier black line. Then there's an open gap, and then you have the cap, the nozzle cap. So right where she's poking.
Outer part.
Yep. If that circle is blocked, air is not going to be able to completely surround our color. We're going to get skips. We're going to, maybe if it's bad enough, it's going to back bubble on its own. You're going to have color bubbling up inside your cap. It's not going to airbrush at all. And if we set our airbrush in an airbrush holder after we've been spraying for a long time and color builds up in the needle cap area, maybe it'll flow back in and dry and block that. Maybe we've tried wiping the front of the airbrush off with a Q-tip and we've just smashed color and smushed it into that area. So you can clean the outside of that nozzle cap, but if there's any color that's leaked back in, it can be on the inside of the nozzle cap and it can give you a problem.
So are you saying that you don't want to clean that with a Q-tip?
You can, but you got to be careful about it. Again, that delicate little fluid needle, and the needle is very sharp. For as delicate as it is, it's a needle, and it'll poke you bad. So a lot of us will use a cotton swab. I'll do it myself, but you have to know that if you're getting reckless with it or heavy-handed with it, you can make the problem worse. You can shove color back up in there, or you can actually damage that needle. Okay. So it's all of us airbrush artists will play with that, but know that you can create a problem for yourself.
Okay. Is there a better way to take care of that?
Make sure that your airbrush is in the holder facing down slightly so it's not running back up into the fluid path. And if you airbrush for long periods of time, just keep an eye on that outermost needle cap that screws onto the end of this, that you'll be able to look at that exploded isometric, that exploded diagram and see, or look at your own piece and see. Just keep an eye on that, because color will build up if you've been going to town for a half an hour. And you can unscrew that needle cap and wipe it out with a Q-tip without ever having to touch these more delicate parts. That fluid nozzle is a little bigger than a grain of rice. So the threading on it is very thin. And all of us, we all have our little wrenches, and if we have a wrench, we must be supposed to use it. So, I mean, you've not done anything that I didn't do when I was first starting out. And I want to say that shearing off a fluid nozzle it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So, and it's just like damaging the needle. These are wear parts. They will wear out eventually on their own accord. And the more heavy-handed we are with the equipment, the more likely we are to damage it. Now, I don't want to scare everybody and have them thinking that they have to treat this like glass. It's like, no, you don't. But if you understand what we're dealing with, then it's going to affect how you work with the equipment, and you're going to have more success with the equipment.
All right,
So
great.
next is our bent needle slide.
Yes.